€1 million for Sandro Tonali to go to Newcastle. Nikki, how good is he? What sort of acquisition have they made here?
Yeah, I like Tonali. Having just said that about the numbers, I do wonder. I'm surprised the numbers got quite so high for Tonali. I think he's got lots to like about him. He's a very energetic player. He likes to play that sort of number 8 role in the high sort of pressing style. I think he fits in a modern team as someone who's going to break up play. He creates a lot of chances from the way he wins possession high up the pitch. There's always this talk about, oh, yes, he used to be treated as the next Pirlo because he was at Brescia, because he had floppy hair, and everyone saw him do a couple of big passes on YouTube. But he's very much a sort of actually aggression and harrying player. But he's not the next player he got compared to a lot, which is Gattuso, either, because he does play high. He does like to be in the face of the defence. He does like to be right behind the attack and winning those balls, as I say, high up the pitch. And I think he could be a nice fit. But I don't know that I sort of think he's a transformative talent. I think he's a really good sort of foot soldier almost that's nice to have in your midfield.
Do you think that's what his agent said, Nicky, when he's negotiating? He's a nice fit. He'd be a nice fit for Newcastle. So does he actually make them better, in your opinion?
Yeah, but I think if you look at Newcastle's strategy this summer, certainly what it looks like, I mean, you can look at it one of two ways. Either their strategy this summer is a bit sort of scattershot and looking at all different positions, or it's what they're telling us it is, Newcastle, which is they're looking at going into the Champions League. They're looking at wanting to have depth at all positions. And I think that in that regard, yes, he's going to make them better. He's a player who's played in a Champions League semi-final just this season and earned his spot there. I mean, he was really, really one of the most important players for Milan on that run. And I think he's absolutely going to contribute right away. And I think his work ethic is exactly what you want in a player who's so young. Do I think he's going to slot in there and at the end of the season be the one who we're all saying, oh, wow, that was sort of the breakout star of the Premier League season? I'm a bit more sceptical about that. But I think, again, in modern football, in squads that are aspiring to compete in Europe and in the Premier League, he's a very valuable asset.
Newcastle has been linked to a couple of other big names from Serie A, Theo Hernandez and Federico Chiesa. Who is more likely to move, if any, Nikki?
I think Chiesa is much more likely to move between the two of them. There's so much uncertainty at Juventus right now. Obviously, Max Allegri's been sort of subject to some interest from Saudi Arabia. If the manager goes, that might change the situation for Chiesa at Juventus. I think it's quite clear at this point that Allegri and Chiesa don't see eye to eye. They're not getting on too great. Allegri plays with this sort of 3-5-2, plays with wing backs, and Chiesa does not look anything like a wing back to me. And when he's been put in that position, there's been some disasters, frankly. I think he needs to be playing somewhere where he can be a wide forward, which is what he is. So at the moment, that looks more likely to me because there's this sort of mismatch between what the club has for him at Juventus and what he can provide. But if Allegri leaves, maybe that team changes. Obviously, they've got Cristiano Giuntoli, the sporting director, is expected to come in from Napoli. There could be all change at Juventus this summer, and maybe that will turn his opinion. Theo Hernandez, look, if the money gets high enough, I'm sure it will happen because that's the way of the world. But I do think he's probably one of the absolute last players that Milan want to let go of this summer, especially with Tonali already leaving the club. He really is, along with Rafael Leao, the star of the team, those two. So I think that will be a much harder deal to swing than Chiesa, who, at the moment at least, as long as Allegri is manager, is pretty unhappy with his lot.
Yeah, what's happened there, Nicky? Because Chiesa, of course, was such a key part of Italy's success in the Euros, one of the most exciting players to watch. Is it all down to Allegri, or has his trajectory just plateaued?
No, it's not just down to Allegri. It's down to a big knee injury and surgery and how long these things take to come back from. I know a lot of sort of the sympathetic people entering in Juventus feel like, hey, do you remember when Del Piero was injured and how long it took us to get him back to the best of his abilities? And I think that's a reasonable way to think about it. But at the moment, he hasn't shown as much since he came back from that injury. And it's been hard for him to show much because he's a winger in a team that doesn't have room for a winger. He's either at wing back or he's playing through the middle, which he doesn't think is his position. But yeah, it just feels like things are at a crossroads with Chiesa. I haven't stopped believing in his talent because, as you just said, Euro 2020, he was absolutely a key member of that Italy team. I've always wondered if he's sometimes looks his very best when he's an impact sub and not a starter, and that's a difficult thing for any player to be. That's not what you sort of hope for someone if you're talking about stars. But I do think he's got the ability to take on defenders, to score goals, to be a game changer when he's confident and fit. And I think coming back from that injury into a team that doesn't have a spot for him, doesn't have a job for him, that can't be helping his attempt to regain that confidence.
And Newcastle playing black and white stripes. As the Juventus. One less thing to worry about.
Oh,
Sign them up.
right. Is that how we're making decisions now?
Well, I'm just helping.
Okay. Federico Chiesa at one point looked like one of the brightest young players in world football. And his ability to get around defenders in 1v1 situations in wide areas, the change of pace, the speed, how direct he is in his play, all of that matches certainly what you would think he would be able to do for Newcastle. Now, he has to be in those 1v1 situations. He has to be given that space to run at defenders. If you force him to be defending in situations in which he doesn't really enjoy doing, in positions that he doesn't really enjoy, he doesn't feel comfortable, which is apparently what he has been forced to do at Juventus, then I don't think you're going to get the best out of him there. And so I think it would be best for him and Juventus and Allegri for him to move on. And if indeed it is Newcastle, I think it gives him an opportunity to get in a back and forth in a sort of style of play that would suit him best, where he can display that athleticism that we hope he still has. That's the other question. We don't know if he still has that in him. We think that he does, and we're just waiting to see after the injury if he's able to come back fully. But until he shows that, then that explosion, which was so incredibly important to his game, if that explosion is no longer there, it limits him as a player, and he has to change the way he plays the game.
But if he does show that, you've missed out.
But he hasn't shown it since 2020. That's 3 years ago. That's a long time. And yes, there is no question, not just the injury, but more importantly, the position. Because when you play the wing back, it's about long distance running. and I'm trying to think of anybody I know who's going to run 60 yards and then get in a 1v1 and be able to change pace and bust past people the way he did when he was playing in the right position. So, can he still do it? I don't think there's anybody can turn around and say yes. But until he's put in a position where you say, right, come on then, show us, can you still do it? Until then, we don't know.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.